Hello, I'm Kate Levinson from Point Raised Books. I own the store along with my husband, Steve Costa. 10% of the sales this afternoon of the books will go to Matrix and Malt. I wanted you to know that. And I've also been asked to alert you that the brochures on your seats are the membership forms if you wish to join Malt. So, Temple, on behalf of the Western community, I'm very grateful for your being here. Last night, I reread the piece in the New Yorker from 1983 that many of you probably have read, that Oliver Sacks wrote. And I was once again moved to tears. Tears for Temple Grandin's deep well of humanity, and her capacity to be with the suffering, her own suffering, the suffering of others, and especially the suffering of animals. She translates the inner world of animals to us and teaches us that in becoming more sensitive to them, we become more human ourselves. Her writing is smart, passionate, direct, and it's hard to put her books down. She shows us the value of the artistic view of the world and inspires us all to contribute in our own distinct ways. You know the saying, dog is man's best friend. I introduce you to the best friend. I know I was going to cry at this. I introduce you to the best friend of the cows, the chickens, the pigs, the dogs, cats, and all the animals in the zoos, Temple Grandin.
It's really great to be here today. Hey, I was wondering, how many cattle people we got here today? Okay, how about autism people? Okay, how about just people interested in animals in general? Okay, all kinds of animals, dogs and everything else. Well, I'd kind of like to know who I'm talking to. I was supposed to be my cattle talk, but I think I'm going to have to deviate some from what the slides are all about and make it, much more general animals. I could have put a different slideshow in. I was told this was supposed to be a cattle talk. I have to say that I am really happy what you're doing here with the Land Trust. As I travel around the country, I'm horrified. Farmland being made in shopping centers. I go into Chicago, and then I go outside of Chicago. I just want to throw up. And I see some of the best farmland in the world getting turned into shopping centers. And I get all around all over the country right now. And similar things happening in Colorado. Saw a beautiful ranch turned into a housing development. Yeah, they even named the housing development after the ranch. And they put this billboard up that said, this land's going to get settled again, and they got vandalized. Not by me, but somebody vandalized the billboard. I think that preserving farmland is extremely important. And one of the things that gets to be a lot of argument about, big agriculture versus, small agriculture. Another thing that preserving this local farmland does, it's food security, too. I was just at a big conference and we had a lot of discussions mostly about food security and having local food provides food security. Now, let's just talk about animal behavior in general. There's going to be cattle slides, but I'm going to have to try to make them into all kind of animal slides. No matter what species you're working with, calm animals are easier to handle. You take a dog into the veterinarian and it's all scared. It's going to take a half an hour to calm down. Another thing I can't emphasize enough, no matter what species you're working with, is give it a non-slip floor to stand on. Animals panic when they start to slip. So what happens is a puppy, when you take it into the vet clinic, it's skidding around on the table. Let's give it a non-slip surface. And the other thing that's really important in handling animals is the attitude to handling. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. Now, when I started my work with cattle, I noticed they were afraid of a lot of little things, like a piece of chain hanging down in a chute. They'd see a little piece of chain hanging down in a chute, they wouldn't go up that chute. They'd see a sunbeam, they'd be afraid of that. They'd see a vehicle go by, they'd be afraid of that. Little things that sort of look like it's not supposed to be there. Animals live in a sensory-based world. A world of pictures, a world of sound, a world of touch sensations. It's sensory-based, not word-based. So if you want to understand how any animal, perceives the world, it's not in words. You've got to get away from language. And the thing is, a lot of people have a hard time seeing the detail. I've been doing talks on cattle handling for 35 years, and why do I have to keep showing the stupid slide of the chain hanging there? Because people don't take them out. Just that simple. And another question I get asked, since I've worked a lot with the slaughter plants, is, do the cows know they're going to get slaughtered? Don't worry about it. I don't have any duck slides. Don't worry about it. I wanted to answer that question when I first started my career. So I went over to the Swift plant, which was renamed Abbott in the movie because Swift still exists as a brand. And I'd watch cattle go up the chute. And then I'd go out to a ranch and I'd watch cattle go up the chute. They behaved the same way in both places. In fact, they were usually calmer at the plant because the plant had better handling. Okay, here's just some examples of the kind of things in the floor that make an animal stop. A drain in the floor, a change in flooring type. They kind of notice little changes in their environment we tend to not notice. Animals are into detail. I also want to mention that kids with autism are also into detail. You see, the normal human mind is top down. A verbal concept, push the data into it. Animals, and especially like young autistic kids, they're going to learn a concept by putting a whole lot of details into a category. Okay, let's take a concept like good table manners. How do you teach that? Boy, I can tell you, that was pounded into me as a kid. Having autism was not an excuse for combing my hair with my fork with my mouth open. So, if I was combing my hair with my fork or like swinging around up in the air, others would say that's bad table manners. Or if I ate with my mouth open, that was bad table manners. Or if I ate mashed potatoes with my hands, that's bad table manners. Okay, those are a whole bunch of specific examples that go to the bad table manners file folder in my mind. Now, here are some cattle headed right into the sun, a very bad reflection, and you get time of day effects. Maybe they just don't want to walk down that alleyway. Now, a dairy cow that walks down there every day, she'll go right through there. But the new heifer, never been in there before, she's going to walk, and she's going to be afraid of it. And I would dig down in the chutes to see what the animals were seeing, and I'd take pictures. And when I first started doing this, people thought I was absolutely, totally crazy. And one of the things I really liked about the HBO movie is they duplicated all my projects absolutely exactly. Even my drawings were even in the movie. And of course, the geek side of me really, really likes that. And one of the things that was done with me as a young child was my ability in art was really encouraged. You take these kind of geeky kids, they get all these different kinds of labels. We need to take the thing they're good at and build on it. And art was build on. Another kid, it might be math. Another kid, it might be good writing skills. Build on that. We've got to be thinking a lot more about what's a kid going to do for a career when he grows up. By the time I graduated from college, I had lots of work experience. I had taken care of 9 courses. I had worked in the research lab. I had done freelance. I had done sewing. I had done a lot of carpentry work. I'd done a whole lot of different things. So I'd get down the chutes, see what the animals are seeing. And I noticed they'd be afraid of those shadows. Maybe on a sunny day, they'd have more problems. Here's just some more examples of shadows and sunbeams. Boy, I can tell you, these can wreck a meat plant. One time, just a couple of years ago, I went out to one of the great big meat plants, and they were having all kinds of handling problems. And I had to find 6 details to fix. One was a sunbeam. Another problem was they could see a person standing there writing down cattle IDs, so I covered her up with a big piece of cardboard. I had to add a light to a chute because they don't like going into the dark. And I had to block up another hole where they could see people walking by. And until I fixed all of these things, the plant just ran really terrible. The other thing is, I had to work with people. One of the things that I find normal people have a real hard time doing when they're problem solving is figuring out, and I don't care whether it's a problem in the school or a problem with animals. Do I have something wrong with equipment or something wrong with the management and the people? And I find lots of times people try to fix it all with equipment. I mean, people thought, well, if we hook up all the schools to the internet, it's going to make everything wonderful. Well, it didn't. They just play video games on it, unless you get creative teachers using it right. And I was just reading the New York Times today, and there's a fantastic article in there on free courses online at places like MIT and Yale. Use keywords like open university and open courses and then names of universities. You can find these things. Yeah, that they use the internet to expand their mind, not, rot it. Now, animals don't like going into the dark. Real sunny day, they don't want to go into this building. This particular place wanted to tear down their whole facility and rebuild it. You know how I fixed this facility? All I did to fix it, all that had to be done to fix it was tear some of the tin off and add white translucent panels to let in more light. They tend to go towards the light, but they don't go into blinding light. I'm amazed sometimes how you can fix a lot of things doing just small things. But people often are looking for the magic techno fix. Back in the 70s, which the movies showed, I thought Claire Danes did just a fantastic job. I was in the engineering mindset that I could fix everything in the industry with equipment. Now I found I can only fix half of it. The other half is good management. And I got to do a little advertisement. The DVD's going to be coming out on August 17th. I'm going to use the keyword Temple Grandin to search for it, because that's the name. I'm just going to show off some of my facilities. Now, when I first started out, people thought it was really weird, and they didn't want to talk to me. And one of the things I had to do to sell jobs was to show my work. I sold my work, not my personality. I was at this ag engineering meeting back in like 1976 or so, and these engineers wouldn't even talk to me. And then I pulled out the drawings that were used to build the div bed. And they go, ooh, you drew that? And I find a lot of people that kind of quirky. You got to sell your work. So you got to make a really great portfolio. And I found that putting solid sides on there helps keep wild cattle really calm. And why make it curved? Because they come on around the bend, they think they're going back to where they came from. And cattle have a natural tendency to go back to where they came from. So that's the reason why they're laid out the way they're laid out. Now, to learn my job in livestock handling, that wasn't done overnight. I went to every feed yard in Arizona and I worked cattle. And I find that one place they have a nice curved chute, but the rest of the facility was laid out wrong. So what I basically kind of did is took all the good bits and put them together into new things. But this was not learned overnight. Abilities have to be developed. Some of you may have read that Malcolm Gladwell book, and he talks about Bill Gates. And he said, well, Bill Gates got where he got because he had access to excellent mentors and teachers. Yes, I had that. Super important. And he practiced, and he practiced, and he practiced, and he practiced. And he had access to this fancy computer terminal. Well, I agree about the practice, and I agree about the having the mentors. I had access to that exact same terminal in 1968, but I couldn't figure out how to program it. Just don't have that kind of mind. Innate ability does make some difference. Okay, people working with an animal like sheep, cattle, they need to understand principles like the flight zone. Now, if you have an animal that's totally tame, a tame horse, they're going to flight zone at all. You can reach up there and you can pet it. And one little hint, don't pat animals, stroke them. Stroke them. Don't do this. Stroke them. I've had people talk to me and say, well, now that I've done that, the dog's just like in love with me. It's like heaven. Stroke them. Right there, I'm just showing people how to turn an animal, just with a little stick with a flag on it. The thing I got to emphasize to people is to be calm. One of the biggest problems I find with people working with cattle is screaming and yelling. I've got to get people to just calm down. That's the first thing they've got to do. Calm down. If the cattle scared and they get them fearful, it takes them half an hour to calm down. Now, animal, being a visual thinker, they can get visually based fear memories. I know a horse that was absolutely scared to death of black cowboy hats. He had alcohol thrown in his eyes during a veterinary procedure, and right when this bad thing happened, he was looking at a black cowboy hat. White hat was fun, but black hats were scary. And the animal often would get afraid of something that it was seeing or hearing right at the moment that the bad thing happened. And if you can, like maybe the dog might get afraid of the place where he got hit by the car. So if you can figure out, what the bad thing is, maybe just get rid of it. That's just great. But I can't get rid of all the black hats in the world. And this just shows, moving some cattle through the crowd pen. I have to keep emphasizing to people, fill the crowd pen half full. Don't jam it full of cattle. People think, well, if I just jam them up in there, then I can, I get more cattle up there, it makes it better. No, it doesn't make it better. Because you get them all jammed in there, and then they have to use electric prods to get them out. No, you don't want to do that. No, calm and move small groups. Now you need to watch things like ear radar. Cattle and horses and sheep, they've got ears that move independently. Watch where those ears are looking. Now when they get scared or aggressive, they just put them flat back. You can just see, one time I saw a picture of a deer, and he had one ear pointed at the camera and the other ear pointed back towards the forest. Look at where those ears are going. Now the dog and the cat, on the other hand, the ears are yoked together. Here are some basic principles of restraint, and these principles apply with every kind of animal there is. A cat, a dog, if you're handling rodents in a lab, to cattle. Non-slip flooring. The fear of falling is a primal fear. Cannot emphasize that enough. I do a lot of work with the slaughter plants, and one of the biggest problems I run into is problems with slippery floors. And boy, can it cause problems. You get an animal just sort of jigging like that, and just panics. And the problem with the floor is it wears out slowly. And people don't realize that it's wearing out, because it happens slowly. Also, sudden jerky motion scares. You move like this, that scares. Whereas steady motion like this doesn't. Also, there's an optimal pressure. Doesn't matter whether you're holding a kitten with your hand or you're holding a cow on a hydraulic squeeze sheet. Tight enough to feel held, but not so tight that it hurts. Pressure over large parts of the body can actually be common. And with the grazing animals, if they have any flight on at all, in other words, tend to back away when you get close to them, blocking vision. These are animals that are controlled by what they see. Now, 15 years ago, I did a study that showed that animals that get all scared and excited when they're handling the squeeze chute have lower weight gain. And when I did this study, this was groundbreaking. Boy, let me tell you, people thought I was absolutely crazy. I always liked kind of doing the pioneering research. We did another study that showed that on horses and cattle, you got the little hair whorls they got right here on your forehead. Animals that have a high whorl way up here startle more easily and are more flighty than animals that have it down here. And we did a paper on that, and the reviewer said that's silly and it's not science. And now when I do a citation research on, I'm finding that the people that are studying the Hox genes, those are the genes for laying out pattern formation in the body, looking at those papers. But I always like doing the stuff that's kind of cutting edge, not just the boring stuff. Okay, let's just look at stress. Handling stress. And what is handling stress? Fear stress. You take a bunch of beef cattle and they get roughly handled and you force them through the chute, their stress hormone gets really high because they're really scared. It's fear. And sometimes they go out and they net deer. I've had wildlife biologists say to me, that can't be very stressful. We only hold them down for 30 seconds. And I said, what if you got mugged on the subway? That only took 15 seconds to grab your wallet. That's really stressful. But a basic principle here is when you force an animal to do something, it's much more afraid than when it does it voluntarily. It's a very important concept. There's dairy cows for the lower levels because they voluntarily cooperate. Then we got trained animals really low. And 6 to 5, well, the literature was saying the normal values were 20 and 30. No, those are stressed off the wall values. And when we sent that paper in, we had reviewers that said the title was judgmental. You can't call your paper low stress handling blood sampling bomb. They didn't want to admit that the animals that they were chasing all around with Land Rovers and everything else were super, super stressed. Now, the thing about an animal is the visual thinker, a guy on the horse and a guy on the ground. In the horse's mind, that's two separate things. I have seen horses where they're really easy to ride, but we have problems with the veterinary work of the shoe. Or they have problems with riding, and they're fine for the ground work. Cattle are the same way. I have seen cattle where their flight zone's only this big when it's the guy on a horse, and then you walk out amongst them and they scatter. Another basic principle is that new things are both scary and attractive. They are attractive when the animal can voluntarily approach. And they're scary if you corner the animal and shove it in their face. Like if I take a flag and I put it out in the middle of the pasture, the Arab horse would be the first horse to go up to it. But if I put the horse in the stall and shove the flag in its face, Arab would be the first horse to panic and get really, really scared. Now, one of the big things I've been working on right now is animal welfare auditing. because I build really nice things in a lot of these different places. And only about 20% of my clients would just really operate things right. And I had about 20% that were awful. You know, you put the equipment in, and you show people how to operate. And then they come back a year later and there's all broken equipment and all this rough handling. Because you see, you got the management part of it. So I worked on designing a measurement system for handling and stunning practices at meat plants. And in 1999, I trained McDonald's how to use this, and Wendy's how to use this. And I saw more change than I'd seen in the 25-year career prior to that, when you got big customers saying, you got to do this. When a plant's risking losing $1 million worth of business, that really made a difference. And now, the Cargill Corporation is putting in video auditing in all their plants. So an auditor over the internet can look at any time and see what they're doing with their cattle handling. Because when we first started doing these audits, people did bad stuff in front of you because they didn't know anything. Now they know better, so they started doing some fake and good during an audit. But they can't do that with the video camera. Now the thing is by measuring things, it prevents bad from becoming normal. We're at the point right now where nationwide, dairy cows have 24% lameness. That's atrocious. You've got bulldogs that can't breathe, they can't walk, they can't have their babies naturally. That's another example of bad becoming normal. I've had people say, well, that's just the way the breed is. Like they looked at bulldogs 40 years ago and weren't that way. Now, if you're working on guidelines, I don't care whether it's for zoning, whether it's for animal welfare, food safety, I don't care what it's for, I want to ban these dreadful words, proper, adequate, and sufficient. Because one person's idea of proper will be somebody else's idea of bad. You've got to have clear guidelines. Here's the example of a guideline that's written clearly. All the pigs have to have enough space to lie down without being on top of each other. And I can tell you one of the places where the guidelines get very murky is in things like autism diagnosis, and now they're labeling some kids oppositional defiant disorder, and labeling like this and that, and it's no more accurate than profiling hijackers. And I'm saying that real seriously. One thing that really concerns me nowadays is I'm seeing a lot of smart, quirky kids that aren't being challenged. They're bored with school. I think it's a shame that a lot of the schools have taken out the hands-on classes. You know, art, music, wood shop, auto shop, welding, things where some of these kids can really excel. You know, if I hadn't had art in elementary school, I would have just been lost. Okay, this is the scoring system that I developed originally for the U.S. Department of Agriculture and for the American Meat Institute. You measure 5 simple things. But these 5 simple things that you measure at the meat plant measure a multitude of sins. I don't measure a whole 100 different things. I got to pick out the 5 things to measure that really matter. Well, obviously, the percentage of cattle is stunned correctly on the first attempt. That's a no-brainer. Now, obviously, you got to get them insensitive. Number of animals prodded with an electric prod. That can depend upon they can be walking and not moving, or it could be bad training. But one of the best measures was how many cattle moo and vocalize. And to pass a McDonald's audit, you can only have 3 out of 100 mooing and vocalizing going up the stunning sheet. And you're only allowed 1 animal out of 100 falling down. And falling down can be caused either by slippery floor or be caused by rough handling. So instead of telling the plant how to build floors, we just measure the falling score. You know, there's nothing in this about telling them how to design equipment. Yeah, there's a few bad practices you may just have to ban. But for the most part, you know, design is not part of this. So people are then free to innovate and come up with good things. Another thing that's good about this is you get what's called inter-observer reliability. So whether I audit it or somebody else audits it, you get the same results. Now in 1996, only 30% of the plants could shoot 95% of the cattle on the first shot. That is just atrocious. And you know what the number 1 problem was? They didn't maintain the equipment. It wasn't designed, they just did not take care of it. Now we're getting into kind of an odd situation where some of the worst animal rights videos and things that are showing up are coming out of some of the little plants. And the big plants, you know, they're getting so heavily audited. No, I'm not going to say it's perfect, but some of the really horrendous stuff has gone on in the little plants. And the GAO, with the General Office of the Government Accountability Office found there was more problems with inconsistent enforcement in little plants. So when I do talk to the organic growers, I go, you've got to make sure your little plants have some horror show going on in there. Because basically the big corporations just do the big plants. And you get into all this argument about big places, people say they're bad, little places are good. I'll tell you it's bad. Badly managed is bad. Badly managed is bad, and understaffed and overworked places are bad. I've been in plants that go very high chain speed, and it's set up right, and staffed right, and work just fine. So when you understaff them, broken equipment, overworked people, that just doesn't work. Now the principle is, you measure a small number of things that measure a multitude of sins. That's the HACCP approach. It stands for Hazard Analysis Critical Control Points. What are the really important things to measure? It's also simple. It's like traffic rules. Traffic rules work because you know what speed limits are, and stop means stop. It doesn't mean slow down, it means stop. Also, it's not a paperwork audit. One thing I have to constantly fight is they want to turn all this stuff into paperwork audits. And that's one thing the FFA has done with aircraft inspection. Yes, and in the last 20 years, there's been about 5 fatal crashes where I can summarize it up with one word: tails. You either fell off the plane, or the steering stuff is really critical inside the tail busted. And none of this stuff could the pilots see, walking around on the ground. Well, somebody signed off on that even though the tail had broken stuff in it. Well, then what you're going to need to do is do some random tail inspections. Because I'm going to put the emphasis on directly observable stuff. A certain amount of paperwork is needed, but I think the regular human mind tends to go with the paperwork. They constantly fight this. We've got to get back to the important stuff you directly observe. The police, after all, take their radar gun and they measure the speed of the car before they pull it over. There's paperwork they got to do, but they enforce the traffic laws based on directly observable things. Now, if you have a problem in a plant, I can use the measurements to show that it's getting better and it's improving. Like an air blowing in their face, then they got to be poked more of the prod, they were gluing more, and I fix it. Or the entrance is too dark. The well-trained handlers, I brought the electric prod use from 38% down to 4%, just by adding a light. These are other things I fixed with simple changes. The thing that was really good, out of 75 plants that McDonald's had on their approved supplier list, only 3 actually had to build expensive stuff. The rest of them we fixed simple things, like lighting, non-slip flooring, solid sides. And there's an example of one of the lights I put up there just to light up the dark entrance. You can also identify animals that are hard to handle. And one of my big concerns I'm seeing today, especially with some of the dairy cows, pigs, and chickens, is what I call biological system overload, where you push the animal's biology to the point where it's starting to come apart. Lameness problems, weakness, chickens who grow really quickly, that leg problems. Actually, the poultry industry in the broilers has started to correct that. Dairy right now, and the pig industry is just getting into some of these really bad problems. Okay, now in designing an auditing system, there's kind of 3 different kinds of variables. And what I've just talked about are animal-based outcome measures. They're the outcomes of bad things. Like on a dairy, I can measure lameness, body condition score, how many skinny cows have I got, how many dirty cows have I got. Those are outcome-based variables. Then you have a few practices you might just have to ban. And then the old way of doing standards was input metrics. In other words, you tell them, well, you got to build the feeder exactly this certain way of building the feeder. There's a few of these we need, like how much feeder space you need, things like all the animals have to be able to eat at the same time, so enough feeder space, maybe minimum space requirements, but getting away from telling them exactly how to build stuff. Okay, here's an example of outcome measures that you could use for assessing welfare in dairy calves. How many skinny ones have I got? How many lame cows have I got? How many dirty animals? How many swollen legs have I got? This is especially a problem in confinement cows, dairy calves. And for organic, or natural, I want to measure coat condition. I am seeing way too much lice on animals, way too much lice and parasites. And I just did a big talk on back in the University of Connecticut, and then Rhode Island, and University of Massachusetts. Talked to a lot of the extension people working with organic. I said, we've got to figure out what to do about the parasites. I mean, I can remember in the 70s, picking grubs out of cattle. You want something disgusting? That is something disgusting. They get these great big zits like this, and then you shove a Coke bottle out of it, and this like icky little worm pops out. And when I was in Arizona, the cattle would come into the feed yards, and these dreadful things. They were coming in them. They didn't get them in the feed yards. You certainly don't want that back. Indoor facilities, we've got to control ammonia levels, and then abnormal behavior, tail biting, ear biting, sheep pulling wool out of each other. These are things that are, I don't want to have a situation where they pass on paperwork and I got 20% body score 1 bone rack tax. Certainly don't want to have that. Well, here's the reason why lameness is such a good outcome measure is look at all the different bad things that could make a cow lame. You could have something wrong with the housing, chickens with rapid growth, you could have genetic poor leg conformation, maybe they don't take care of their feet. They can have injuries. In fact, I have a new book out that it's called Improving Animal Welfare, Practical Approach. It's a textbook. It's a little bit pricey. Dealers are selling it on Amazon.com for $60. I wish it wasn't that expensive, but that actually is a good price. And what I did is I went through all the scientific research, and then this would be aimed at people that were going to implement on-farm animal welfare programs. Okay, here's the thing, then you ban some stuff. Salvage station stalls, maybe dock and dairy, cow tails. You can say, well, okay, there's certain things you just don't do. Those kind of standards, those are easy to write. And then you need a few input measures like some minimum space requirements and things like that. Right now I was just talking to somebody that was working with, actually it was in the natural and organic segment, and they were, some people aren't very good farmers and they think giving chickens a quarter of an inch of feeder space is okay. No, that's not okay. One other thing I want to do now, because people are going to have a lot of questions about a whole lot of different